everyone. My name is Alexis Sersha, and I would like to welcome you, each and every one of you, to another episode of Soul Vibes. We've been, participating in the Soul Vibes for quite a few episodes now. And basically, for those that are new or listening for the first time, whether you're watching this live or joining later, you're part of this energy, part of the round table, part of this sacred space that we co-create together, and where we discuss all the different ramifications, all the different perhaps issues, and all of the different things that come up in a soul-filled life. And soul-filled life is a natural state of being, natural state of a human. People feel the separation, or some people don't even believe or feel this presence in a conscious way. But, it is a natural way to be disconnected. It actually takes a lot of energetic work. It is huge, complex processes that keep a person disconnected. And so I invite again each and everyone to come and gather together in this safe space. And all of these meetings, online meetings, are about really invitation for you, for each one of us, to come and join in the feeling, in the experiencing, in this tangible presence, this tangible something other, if these are the perhaps not the right words, but this greater part of yourself that, for some people we talk about soul, we call it soul, or just presence, or some people call it divinity, the I am that I am. There are so many different words and names and expressions, and this is how it should be. There shouldn't just be one word, one correct word, for all of these experiences. Because, firstly, no one else can experience this as you do. And also, like, other people can describe their experiences, but yet each one of us cannot really experience how another person is experiencing this presence. We can perhaps like relate to the words that they say, the expressions of art, in how they live their life, in what you see through their eyes, or feel in the energy. And these are all very valid and a natural way to radiate this presence. But the relationship really is a very unique and very individual, just like, for if you really think about it, you cannot really see through another person's eye. You can't really perceive how another person is experiencing color. For example, you grow up, and while you're growing, you see particular colors around you. And the adults would say, well, this is green, or this is red, this is blue. Um, and then you start associating what you see, the shade of what you see, as that color. And whenever you see it and perceive that color, okay, this is blue, this is green, this is red, whichever color it may be. But you can never really experience how another person actually perceives or sees that shade that you call green. They too have seen a certain shade and been taught a word for it, but we can only ever experience our own connection to that color, or how we perceive that color, and so it's the same with soul. We can't really presence or anything, the identity, the feeling of self, the sounds, how we experience, let's say, music, how we experience scent, or any parts of sensuality, we can share through acts, through words, through our different, all sorts of different expressions, our experiences. But they are really ours. And so this invitation to feel your own presence, your own connection with you between divinity and human, your own dance with your knowingness, with your wisdom, with your inner world and the outer world. This is your own, you own it, you are it. We don't, but the journey here is in owning this consciously, being aware of this consciously. For when the light, this light of consciousness, this light of awareness keeps filling you, keeps permeating every part of yourself, you just become more conscious. And another expression of this is more light, is you're filled with more light. And what does that mean? It's almost like, let's say, the particles of light are permeating through all of the matter, through all of the feelings, the emotions of everything, all the layers of who you are. And as it's permeating, and I can feel that you're feeling it as I'm talking, you're invited to experience what we're talking about. As it's permeating, as the light of consciousness, the awareness is permeating all the parts of yourself, so you become more and more aware and more aware of all of the different parts of who you are. And there is so much of who you are. There are layers. You become aware of all of the different states, your physical, your emotional. The physical is the last one because it seems it's matter, and is the last one to be able to manifest your new awarenesses, your new light of consciousness. But you have all the different bodies, and in spiritual traditions, they're called emotional self, physical self, etheric self, and they describe a number of different layers of who we are. I don't I haven't remembered all of those words, because my awareness of these things is not so much in a way to delineate, to separate all the different layers and name them and give words to them. This is very appropriate, and there are many who have done it throughout the history and who are doing it, and there's a lot of knowledge on these things. For me, it's more just about my own personal experience. And I too experience many, many different layers and levels. And the more time that I hang out in the spaces of consciousness, in the spaces of self, being consciously connected with my soul, the more I can actually become aware of the nuances and the subtleties and the multitudes of who I really am. And this who I really am, sometimes it's a very, how can I say, from a human perspective, it's very weird and bizarre and it's undescribable, because who we really are in a human terms is so different to what the simple identity would have you represent yourself. Even the ability to create identity and your ability to then identify with that identity is quite miraculous, quite bizarre, quite interesting if you think about it. Like, if you're not this identity that you've either developed or, society has helped to develop, and all of these things are appropriate because we live with other people, we share reality with other people. So we do need to create identities. Where people get stuck is, some people have lovely identities. And for many people like that, in those that are just reason, they have a lovely life, which lovely identities are expressed by a lovely life. They go through all of the different experiences that that a human experiences, And perhaps until something very drastic, dramatic, or painful happens to them, they don't question any of the identity. People who question the identity, of course, may be some, not all, but some of the people that perhaps their identity was created in painful circumstances. And so, in order to change into their own reality, their own experience, they need to look at the identity and, learn new habits or whatever have you. Because their identity obviously is not satisfying. Painful identity is not satisfying. And yet, in some ways, you could say that these particular people, even though, in many circles they're called perhaps unlucky people, perhaps you could, from a different perspective, they are lucky because they awaken through that, and then they become much more flexible in being able to shift from one identity into another. And that is an incredible mastery when you really feel into it. And these identities, you know, sometimes they can be easier to change, and sometimes they take years to change. And one of the attributes of being conscious of who you are is that, in some ways, each one of us is incredibly complex. And at the same time, there is this incredible natural simplicity of who we are. And when you actually travel consciously through the different layers that are available to be experienced within this reality, you realize that both are true at the same time. That you're incredibly complex to who you thought you were, or who, let's say, a person within a society is supposed to think. Like, let's say they're supposed to think, okay, I'm a human being. I get born, I go through school, then I decide on profession, become a parent, and grow old and save and build a house and all of these things. When a person thinks this is all they are, in some ways, this really is simplicity also, because when you start really experiencing the tangible presence of your soul, all of a sudden, those kind of ideas of self are swept away. And all of a sudden, when you become aware of all these different, who you are, not that you can define it, but it seems incredibly complex, because from this small identity, which when you discover your bigger reality is this identity, then all of a sudden looks very small, very boxed, very limited. While before, when you were in it and identified with it completely, it looked huge. And so again, then these are again different perspectives and this too is quite a bizarre, really, and magical ability that you have. Is like, how can you, like, think of certain, be able to identify with something so completely that it looks huge, and then disidentify and step out of that reality into a different reality where what once looked huge all of a sudden looks small. When you actually start grasping that these things that you before maybe you weren't even aware of or notice, and you do them so seamlessly, so naturally, when this light of consciousness permeates this ability and other abilities, then you realize how really magical, magnificent, but also at the same time, from human perspective, bizarre these things are. And I mean bizarre in a wonderful way. I don't mean it in a negative way, in a way that portrays just how different this greater realities, this greater who you are, is from that initial identity that as human, we most often we all who we thought that we were, just this one human identity. And so even this ability to, not ability, or the attribute that your greater self has, the timelessness, being out of space and out of time, the being forever. These words, even though they don't mean anything in the reality of a soul, from a human perspective, this is the part of yourself that you're dealing with. And so that is why the reality of your soul self is so completely different than the reality of a identified human who identifies only with the human, so-called human life, the normal life. Because the human life, of course, is limited. You are inside of life, inside all of the different laws, whether physical laws, psychological laws, how things work. And of course, then you have all of the laws of society and humanity and natural laws. So you can feel quite powerless in this space. There's a lot of things you have to deal with, but then when you step outside of that, you realize that you are this vast being that was involved with whole co-creation of a physical realm. And to then step again back from that and to realize that even the physical realm, from the soul's perspective, is a small part of itself. There's this vastness, endless, never ending reality of its being. And so these, of course, some of the things that you as a human, as you hang out in this space where you commune and communicate and actively and dynamically feel the presence of your soul, of this presence that you have to come to terms with. And as you're integrating this and coming to terms with and breathing through and harvesting the wisdom of all of this relationship, this interaction, this dance, and as you keep growing and expanding through all of this, through this permeation of consciousness, permeation of light, through all of your being, you keep growing, you keep expanding, and of course, in your abilities keep grow. And so, whether some people would say, oh, but these abilities were always there. Okay, it's just a matter of speech, whether it is that you get new abilities, or whether these abilities were dormant within your soul self and you just become aware of it. I'm not going to argue with people, for these kind of expressions. This is up to each one to determine what feels true for themselves and how they perceive these. And these are just words as well to try and describe this reality, this relationship between your human self and the soul self. And so now again, we've talked about this identity. And so for me, Alexis, how do I experience these shifting identities? I mean, as I was talking, like I could feel that we were jumping all the different identities. And if you notice, you can sort of replay again and be perhaps more conscious if you haven't noticed how we were jumping different timelines, different identities of yourself. We weren't jumping all of our identities together because these are individual things. So when I say we're jumping identities, I mean I'm jumping my own, you're jumping your own identities. And so as we're jumping all the different timelines, if you are clear and aware, you will notice them because they have a different feel, different identities. Different timelines have a different feel. They also have different potentials, different future, and also a different past. So how do you become aware of this? You're present with these things, and all of a sudden you then have this aha moment, and you realize, so that's what that is. This is the magical ability, or incredible, really, when how do you know what something is? Like, how do you know that, oh, this is shifting the timelines? These are the different timelines. You just know. When I have these aha moments, all of a sudden I just become aware of something, and I just know what it is. And this is the incredible alchemical process, and the inner wisdom, inner knowingness, where you just know what things are. How do you know? You just know, like it's like this feeling. Um, it's a feeling, it's an experience. And all of a sudden the name comes, or or rather not even words, but the knowingness, this knowing what certain thing is. And very often I come through across on the this landscape something that I don't know, and but I take a note. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And then a week later, again, it comes, and all of a sudden, wow, now I know what it is. And once I know what something is, then I know it. It's kind of like, let's say, once you feel the tree, you know trees, and then you see another tree, and you know it's a tree. You don't, even though they look completely different, they can look different, they can be in a different season, like a tree in winter where there's big winters looks very different than a tree in summer with leaves and stuff, or tree in autumn with all the different colors on the leaves, not green anymore. But you still know it's tree. And so on the inside, it's the same, like things that were very etheric, all of a sudden feel like they've got shape. They get shape, and your knowingness knows what it is. And this is like a maturing process. You just get to know all these different things. And you can't do this really unless you are, intimate, familiar with this space. You can read about it, you can watch videos about it, but it only becomes reality when you own it, when it's yours, when you take ownership of it. And all of these things, perhaps some people may say, oh, this is too etheric, too intangible for me. But it is like, how do you know? Let's say, let me ask you for things that are much more, let's say, common knowledge. How do you know what emotion feel like? Because you feel it. You can see, for example, on another person, and you can identify, oh, I know this. This is, let's say, joy, or whatever they're feeling. You can tell what a person is feeling if you're familiar with your own emotions. But how do you know something is an emotion? You have knowing about it. Once you know, you know. Then it's the same with all the other things. Like when you know what feeling is, you can get a feeling. We have many people who say, oh, I don't actually have feelings. And then when I point out, okay, feelings are this, so you feel satisfied, you feel curious, you perhaps have a feeling. So you just notice, what are you feeling at the moment? Do you have a feeling of expectation? Are you feeling expectant? Are you feeling bored? Are you feeling anxiety? Are you feeling, anxious? Are you feeling joy? Are you feeling well-being? Are you feeling, curiosity? Are you feeling disdain? All of these, you always have feelings, and feelings always tell you the truth. Feelings are your authentic, emotions are much more involved with the outside, this interaction of the outside. And sometimes, let's say, you can feel anger, something can trigger you, and you feel anger. But this feeling of anger may not always portray it is the true and authentic expression in that moment of yourself. So if you're feeling anger, to acknowledge that you're feeling anger is a true, authentic self-expression and self-perception. But the anger itself doesn't always reflect the truth of the situation. For example, let's say the emotions don't always reflect the truth of the situation. Let's say someone did something and maybe it triggered your past experience, a memory from earlier times. And so then you react to your perception of the situation and what the other person did. But then perhaps you have a chat with the other person and then you realize, wow, I actually misinterpreted that situation, or something they did and they didn't mean anything by it triggered my memories and that brought anger. See, so even though your anger is the truthful expression of what you're experiencing at that time, it may not be the truthful, may not be an accurate perception of the situation, while the feelings are very different. The feelings are not so much even the reaction or the trigger to what is happening outside. They arise much more from your inner truth, from your inner who you are, from the truth of your own self, the authenticity, and a much more like a true reflection of what is going on, and much accurate, much more subtle, but they are much more accurate depiction of what is going on. Like, for example, and they're much more permanent. Let's say you have a feeling of joy, a feeling of wellness, contentment. These are feelings that actually are always there once you have this clear, clean connection with your own wholeness of self. And they are not dependent on what is happening on the outside. Kind of like we can liken this, for example, with ocean. Let's say ocean, you have the depths of the ocean where you can have strong currents, or it can be just very peaceful, and you have those waves on top. So even though the waves on top, emotions can sometimes can feel so intense, they are the waves on top, little waves, while the feelings are that wholeness of the ocean, the permanence of the ocean, the being of the ocean. Ocean just is be, and the emotions actually, the interaction, like musical notes and like harmonies of being alive, but they are very much surface, even though, as I said, they can actually feel intense. When you become more and more aware of the depths of yourself, it's actually that you then realize the much more truer nature of you, which is that the feelings are actually much stronger and permanent, and there this communication of the depth of your being and an accurate depiction of what is going on with you. And also they are that which upon which you can actually accurately make decisions on. Because whenever you make decisions on these authenticity of yourself, you're acting on feelings, the feeling, not emotion, but feeling, this beingness. And so when you act on the feeling, what you and when you allow yourself, this is even one of the first steps, or the most important steps, where you becoming this authentic, true self, is allowing yourself the freedom to feel what you feel. And that is why in a disconnected world, the emotions are stirred a lot, not because there's something wrong with emotions per se, but because they seem like all pervasive and intense, and until people find this deeper anchor in themselves, in their true authentic self, they can be swayed by emotion. You can't be swayed by feeling, but you can be swayed by emotions because they're these temporary surface things that can be uh, affected by others, by ideas from outside. They can be purposefully triggered to sweep people away on all sorts of tangents and things, when narratives and stories can be created utilizing triggered emotions to sweep people, and they discount all of those forces, if you will, discount and try to mask people from being able to notice their feelings. No, and again, it's not that any part of self is less worth or more worth. It is just they have simply a different function. If you look at your hair, has a different. It's not any less. If you look at your legs, are a different function than your arms, than your heart, than your things. It's not anything less or more, but they do have different function. And so with feelings, you will notice they are discounted a lot. For example, let's say if you look at the masculine part of self, or men as they are, as if you're a man in this lifetime, um, very often the feelings, well, most often the feelings in men are not encouraged. Men are not taught to be, to perceive or give value or give credence to their feelings. They can be completely oblivious because, men are very powerful, strong, physically strong, and the expression of physical creativeness, making, in their own way, uh, ideas tangible. People can have, there's an idea of a building and then it's built. And so, if you keep people disempowered, you could disconnect them from their awareness of feeling, because feeling is that authenticity itself. And again, feelings, again, this comes again back to the individual person. Only you can feel what you feel. And only you can learn to recognize what different feelings mean and then act on them. And whenever you actually act on your feeling from your true authentic self, which is a feeling, you will not go wrong, because it is your distance between your presence and your human self that together co-create your life. And when I say wrong, it's not that naive thinking of what life is, being here on physical plane, it's challenging. That's why we're here, to work through, to overcome the challenges. But challenging is different than painful, than suffering, than feeling of hopelessness. No, these challenges, they strengthen your ability to deal with them. They strengthen your self-worth and feelings of this well-being, because you grittily interact with physicality, and you learn how to mold much more consciously. And also you have the healthy dose of humility to realize that beingness is much bigger than the human self, that the mind is, much bigger than the mind. And so this it becomes this beautiful dance where you feel self-empowered and also humble, when you feel authentic and also very individual in these expressions. And other people also then, this freedom to allow yourself to perceive your feelings. It's a huge step of your being sovereign, feeling masterly in your own self. And also a huge step on your road to freedom, to self-realization, because once you start allowing yourself to perceive what you feel, the freedom to perceive what you feel, what you truly feel, the freedom to work with this rather than giving power away to external authorities on these matters. The freedom to then act on your own truth, on your own wisdom, the freedom to harvest the wisdom of your own interaction with your soul, with your reality, the freedom, the joyful freedom of being human, the joyful freedom of feeling physicality, the physical world, and interact as this sovereign, soul-filled being. It is undescribable. And this is, if you have a war, if you want to think in a language of awards, this incredibly award, this is your award, the final, not the final, but the true goal, really, if you want to think of things in this way. It is not, the goal is, so to speak, is not so much to have perfection, but being alive is perfection in itself. Experiencing physicalness in all its messiness, in all its beauty, in all its things, when you really start perceiving the magic, the sacredness of it all. And this is what then feeds this joy, comes from joy in itself, this feeling of joy, and then it feeds back this joy back into your own self. And so it keeps dancing. You keep dancing with yourself, interacting, give and take, allow and flow, enact and, act decisively within the physical world. Make choices based on your true authenticity, on your true authentic self, out of this well-being that is your soul, that is the presence of your soul, that is this greater, larger you. And so you keep giving, you as a human, you keep gifting your soul, and your soul keeps gifting you. So it's a two-way dance that continues to expand and grow. But at the same time, you always are, I often say it, 100% in this relationship, human and soul. It's a perfection itself in its imperfection, but it is 100% always. The soul demands of the human 100% and gives also. And so in this dance, I can say it's not really accurate to say, actually both are true. Both statements are true to say that, let's say 2 years ago, 5 years ago, I was at 100%, and now I'm at 100%. And also it is true that I've grown in between and I've expanded in between. And yet it is also true that I am still the same. All of these things are true at the same time, because the language of is very limited in this way and does not portray the vastness of who you are. And within this vastness, all of these seeming inconsistencies and these seeming oppositions and seeming what something that would cancel itself actually exists very peacefully, very co-creatively in this vastness of who you are. And so this too is a huge change, for a human, because you really do think in a very, very different way. You perceive things in a very different way. And so, you kind of can relate to people who are still in this small place, but they can't really relate to you because you're now conscious in this much more vast space of who you really are. And they too really are that in their own way, but they're just not conscious of it. They just play within that smaller space. And also, it seems that is also why then your life perhaps may seem magical to others, but it is not magic in an old sense as to what they would think is magic. It's just simply that you live in this much vaster space of self. And in that vaster space of self, of course, much more is possible. I think like I wrote a post one time or blog about, this is like analogy where a person that may be living on tropical islands and perhaps never seen a TV, there's nothing wrong with that, and they perceive their reality as it is. But even just on earth, there's so many more realities. There are places of snow, there are places of four seasons, there are places of huge rain, there are deserts, there are and so the more your consciousness is expanded, the more tools you find, the more variety, the more things you find. And it's the same within you. You find all these tools and abilities, but it's not magic really, um, it's like when you really think it's all natural, like snow falling is natural. It may look magic to someone from a tropical island that perhaps has never seen snow and they see it for the first time. But it's just all these natural weather phenomena that create snow. There's nothing it's all miraculous, but there's nothing magical in an old sense about, let's say, snow. It's just natural processes that create. And so the same, it is that all of these inner processes create, give you abilities, or you discover all these different abilities. Then the more abilities you have, the more then you're able to keep expanding within yourself, to keep, uh, growing. And at the same time, you're not growing because you're still the same, the same vastness of being that you were 10, 20, 50 years ago. So that's those things that don't seem to be true at the same time, but they are. And so all of the identities and the perception of identity, it is very, very important and helpful in these times of these fast changes to be able to be shifting your identities and perceptions and points of view. And the identities, let's say, of who you were that fit in the old world, an old system, is very, very different than this new identity that would benefit each one of us to be able to become or allow to permeate, to fit, and be able to deal with in a much more joyful, much more natural and flowy way with these new times. And so for me, how I perceive the new identity starts knocking on the door. For example, perhaps I dream about someone, or I can dream about a friend, or someone that has this feeling of this new identity. And then I realize, oh, okay, so I've projected that onto another person, but it's really something that I want and need, and it's coming closer to my conscious beingness as I am at the moment. And then over, whether it's weeks or months or days, I keep getting a feeling of this, but this part of myself is not actually yet manifest fully, but I as a human, I'm just keep asked to own it more and more, to own it more and more, to own it more and more. And this new identity then has its own priorities, has its own view on everything. This just comes by itself. It's kind of like this information package that my soul gives to me or gifts me with. And then I just have to unfold it and own it and integrate it and act out of this newness. And so very often, and this is not a one-time occurrence, this new identities may be subtle, maybe big, it's hard to say how other people perceive this. Do they see me change, or am I the same as I was 10, 20 years ago? This is up to others to say. But for me, I do start feeling and owning this newness, this new identity. And normally, if it's something that I want to try out, it's kind of like the new clothes, I like. It's normally something I like. So this has been happening for me in the last couple of months very strongly. I like this newness that this new identity is bringing. And when I notice her, I just keep breathing and I start owning its attributes slowly and surely. And some of the attributes are something perhaps, that I had a wishful thinking of even when I was 5. So again, that's why we come back to that. Are these new or they've always been there? It's a interesting question to ponder, but for me, it doesn't really matter. More what matters is that I can own this and then integrate and then act on this newness and embody that. What does that mean? So this identity can be, let's say, here, and then it's slowly, let's say here, and then it's slowly, as I own it and claim it, comes closer and closer until it is in my everyday working environment, so to speak, everyday working environment of myself. That's how I can best describe it. And means that then, let's say, from the previous identity, I may have acted a certain way. So let's say I wake up and my previous identity would have meant that I did as a human certain things in a certain order. But with this identity, then it's a different kind of order. So for example, let's say just a simple thing like the old identity, let's say, may say, okay, you go to bed at 12 midnight. But this new identity says, no, my reality is now I go at 10. And then all of a sudden, when 10 comes naturally, then and effortlessly, if I go with it, if I own it, then all of a sudden I start going to bed at 10. And it's not that I have to make myself do it, but it's a natural process. But before the old identity is gone, there can be days where I'm like swinging, from this to this, and I may go back to the old identity for a while until, oh yeah, I remember I have to integrate this new part of self. And so it's kind of like, if you for people that have been giving up something, let's say, there was a time, I think for about 5 years in my early 30s, when I smoked. I learned at work. I did it at work to sort of take, to have that little break here and there, like the smokers would go out and have a little break, and it was social, very social as well. And so I smoked. And then when I realized, wow, my body is changing and it's not something that I want to keep doing, then I thought, okay, now we stop. And I did the cold turkey kind of thing. But the huge part of it is to actually, I just remembered my identity of being a non-smoker. So it's not like that I had to force myself. It wasn't easy. It's not easy because you fluctuate between those identities, smoker and non-smoker. But I just remembered what it felt like to be a non-smoker. So then instead of the first thing I wake up and I want a cigarette, all of a sudden it's like the non-smoker being, it's not on its list to do. But to smoke is not on its list. There are all these other things that are priority, or things that the way the day looks for a non-smoker is quite different than the smoker, because non-smoker doesn't have those smoking times, nor does a non-smoker goes to the shop and buy a cigarette, or has to allow that money to be there for that, or go to a cinema and in the middle of the movie start thinking, oh shit, I have to go out and have a cigarette. This is a non-smoker that doesn't experience that. But it was more, so it wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna give up smoking, and then this willpower thing. It's not like that. But it does require discipline, but it not to not pick up that cigarette and light it. It is more of a discipline to say yes or no to the identity of who you are. Because when you're shifting identities, especially as you become more and more conscious, they're very definitive and absolutely 100% empowered, if I can use that word, choices that I make. And it's not that they have to be loud or noisy or intense choices, but they have this 100% determination. It can just be a very quiet, soft decision and a choice. But there is this knowingness with it, that I know that it is it. That when I make that kind of choice, my whole being knows that I mean it. It's a choice, and that I make quietly, but it absolutely carries with it the meaning. I mean that, and I know how these kind of choices now feel. Like as I was awakening, these were some of those aha moments when when these kind of choices came. I really noticed them in a big way, because they had a different scent, a different feeling to it, and a different determination than what I was used to. But now I know how those choices feel. So when I mean something, when the choice is made out of meaning, I can just be a millisecond. It can be done in a millisecond, but it absolutely reverberates through my whole reality. And absolutely in that millisecond, everything changes, because I have done that choice. And within it was packed this sense of meaning it. And then I also know when it's just a fluffy choice. If sometimes I still make choices, but deep down I know that, oh, this is just a fluffy choice. It's a wishful thinking. It's not yet at that depth of determination. And then one day that day comes when it's no longer a wishful thinking, but it is just that decisive choice that I make. And it has to do with changing and shifting realities, my reality, my identity, there are all sorts of choices that you as a human make. And it's right for you as a human to make. And then your whole other self, the soul and all the other self, then changes. It's like these reverberates, like these ripples go through all of who you are, and then that new reality is brought about. It sometimes takes for physical reality a little bit to adjust, but sometimes it already in that second everything is different, and I feel different. And these kind of choices bring with it peace and calmness, this feeling of serenity, of joy, of peace and calmness, and this feeling of absolute mastery of my reality and self, because they have their influence within my world, within my inner world, is just so absolute. And that's how it feels. They feel like that. And so even with this identity, I get presented inside, I get presented with these choices, this or that, or do you like this? Like I get a feeling of this new identity, and then I feel it. Oh yeah, I love this. This is so suited for me. And then I just breathe her in, and that's pretty much it. It's come close, or some part of it is integrated, and then I start acting out of that. But yeah, it definitely requires those moment of decisive choices, and these choices, of course, also have influence on the whole co-creation with the whole humanity of because we are in this together in our world, and so we co-create, and the choices that I make, they contribute, not more than others, but I do my part of what I'm responsible for in this human collective, or whatever that you might want to call this. And so this last, yes, couple of months, I have been very aware, not every day even, but of this new, but on a regular basis, more and more often, frequently, of this new that is coming in. And it is very much, much more, it's hard to even say. I can't even make this claim whether, 5 years ago I was less aware of this identity shift, because always we've changed identity. This is also part of a normal human life that all people do. Like when you're 5, you have identity of a 5-year-old. And then when you're 10, you've shifted your identities. When you're 30, you're now 30, you've shifted your identities. So it's not something unnatural or something that people are not don't know from their personal experience, but they just might not be aware of it. It is something that is happening underneath their conscious awareness. And so it's only when you expand your conscious awareness that you go through these layers where these things exist, and then you become all of a sudden aware of, oh my gosh, I have ability, and not only that I have ability, but I do it just really naturally. I shift identities. And then, of course, also you become aware how in some identities maybe you're stuck. Maybe some identities you may be stuck in, or people with what we call, mental health issues. This is one of the things that, some people get stuck in those trauma events, and that's what then is called a mental health issue. Because let's say some people get stuck emotionally, for example, at 5, or at the age of 5, and then even though their physical body grows up, we have words for people like that are in that state. Some are not so pleasant, some are unpleasant, but it's not healthy, really, whether to be with a person that is stuck emotionally at 5 years old. Just because they can't healthily deal with the reality of life, and so. But if they can, move those things, set it into motion again, then they become healthy. And also, you know, this pretty much the awakening and integrating shadow and all of these, walking through the valley of darkness and all of this, pretty much is really what, well, one part of it is just that, is just seeing where, as an individual, you are stuck, where those energies are stuck, and clearing them out and allowing them to be in motion again. because life, the existence of who you are, is a dynamic motion. It's not static. And so we're due to whatever circumstances and just a normal human life, as a society, we teach and make people to get themselves stuck in all these different ways to be able to fit within the limited society, within the idea that humanity, our society, it's not that society is bad in itself, but the ideas of who we are as individual humans is an old idea, because it's not, if we are co-creating something, then society and culture and all of these things are appropriate and good. But when they no longer fit because they're too small, then of course it's like they just become too constraining and need to expand to fit in with all of these new ideas and new revelations, self-revelations of who we really are and how we now operate as this very, very different soul-filled human being, which is a very, very different being than someone who is to large extent or unconsciously connected or is disconnected to a large extent, or just not conscious of that. And so the reality itself, the earth, is also has changed to accommodate awakened beings. And we are very much now living in a time where all shades exist, very unawakened and very awakened, and all the shades in between. It's like it's not either this or that in this sense. People are in all these different stages and in realize, stages of realization, and how we perceive things also are very, very individual. And so more and more, as you become more and more conscious, you just become more and more self-determined. And this, of course, then affects society at large if they're trying to fit everyone into those very small boxes. But I think we're way beyond that, where the energies have changed to such a large extent that people who try to live in those small boxes and try to fit people into those small boxes, because they don't have awareness of really all this space, the vastness of what really exists, they actually can't affect you when you are aware of all these, when you are aware of yourself in all these different layers and in realms and stuff like that. And so they can't actually affect you anymore. And especially because the energies have changed to accommodate living in this way too much. But they do, people in the box, they do have big influence of other people who are still in the box. But once the person starts awakening, yeah, then they're out of the box. Pretty much, and you can't, even if you try, I mean, some of the things it's very comfortable, and it's a habit to live within the box, comfortable for parts of yourself, not for your whole self. But so yeah, sometimes we kind of wonder, you can go through times when you wonder, was it even worth it? Especially when it's tough, because it's a challenge. Awakening, as you know, and then walking and awakening it's got a lot of challenges. And it feels like the good old nostalgic time, nostalgia for those good old times when the world was just a tiny box. But then it's like, oh my gosh, all the gifts and all of the experiences and the wisdom and the delightful deliciousness of feeling yourself and knowing yourself as an expanded being Yeah, there's just no way that living in a box has anything to offer really in exchange. There is nothing in the box that is really, when you really sort of think about it or feel about it, and remember all the experiences and just the delight and the joy, and this joy and this calmness and this peace is not big ripple making. Like, it doesn't make big waves. It's just this quiet presence. I mentioned in one of the articles, I saw on meme something like the silence of growing things. When you have a picture, let's say, of a forest or anything like that, or even a child, a picture of a child, and they're a baby or 5-year-olds or whatever age. The growing is actually, there's incredible silence about the life growing. It's not loud. It's not. Mm, it's extremely exuberant, but it's not drama making. When you look at the forest, I mean, of course, it's alive, and it's alive with noise of sounds of, let's say, birds singing and all of this, and yet we call that silence. And people go for a walk in a forest, even though it's full on alive and has sounds, we still call it silence. And this ingrown wisdom that we have, because it is fully dynamic, and it's always growing and changing, and yet it is at the same time, there is this beautiful peace and quietness about it, that silence of growing things. And just feel, I invite you, as we complete another Soul Vibes, to experiment in this space, meaning to feel this, to play with this, how this silence of growing things, this simplicity of the vastness of you, of the timelessness of you, of the foreverness of you, this beautiful, wonderful, peaceful simplicity of that, and the silence and the quietness of that. And so, thank you very much for joining as always. And until next time, namaste.